was a typical Saturday afternoon when 17-year-old Emily walked into her house after a weekend shopping trip. As she entered, the sound of hushed voices from the living room caught her attention. She thought nothing of it at first, assuming her father was on a business call or talking to a colleague. But as she stepped closer, she froze in her tracks, her heart skipping a beat. Her father, David, was sitting on the couch with someone she recognized immediately. It was her best friend, Sarah. They were sitting too close, too comfortably, exchanging glances that Emily had never seen between them before. Something about the atmosphere felt off. The air seemed to hold an unspoken tension, one that made Emily's stomach churn. "Hey," Emma greeted her with a forced smile, her voice too high-pitched. Emily smiled back, but the unease in her chest grew stronger. "Hey, Sarah, what's going on?" She glanced at her father, who immediately stiffened, his face paling. David stood up too quickly, his movements almost too jerky. "I didn't expect you back so early, Em." "Yeah, I was just finishing up with Sarah," Sarah added, the nervousness in her voice unmistakable. But Emily wasn't fooled. She could see it now, the way Sarah avoided her gaze, the way her father's eyes darted around the room, as if searching for an escape. Emily had grown up around this house. She knew when something was wrong. "Why are you two acting weird?" Emily asked, her voice cutting through the tension. David swallowed hard, his expression darkening. "There's nothing to worry about, Em. Just go upstairs and relax." But Emily wasn't convinced. She turned her gaze toward Sarah, her best friend, her confidant. "Sarah, what's going on? Why are you here with my dad?" The silence was suffocating. Sarah bit her lip, her hands trembling as she stood up. I don't know how to explain this, Emily," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. David stepped forward, but before he could say anything, Emily turned and ran upstairs to her room. Her heart was pounding in her chest, her mind racing as the pieces began to fall into place. She sat down on her bed, trying to steady her breath. Her mind kept returning to the image of Sarah and her father, sitting so closely, their eyes locked in a way that made Emily feel sick to her stomach. The truth hit her like a wave. Her father, the man she had always trusted, was having an affair with her best friend. Emily felt betrayed, her entire world crumbling around her. She had always looked up to her father, believing that nothing could break the bond they shared. But now, the reality of what was happening shattered everything she had ever known. And the worst part? Sarah, the one person she had trusted above all others, had betrayed her in the worst way possible. As Emily sat there, her mind spiraling, the sound of footsteps interrupted her thoughts. Her door creaked open, and David appeared in the doorway. His face was full of regret, but there was something else there too, a hint of fear. "Emily," he started, his voice shaky, "I need to explain. Please, just hear me out." Emily stood up, her fists clenched at her sides. "Explain? Explain what, Dad? How you've been lying to me all this time? How you've been betraying Mom and me?" David's expression faltered, his mouth opening and closing as if searching for the right words. But before he could speak, Emily cut him off. "I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear any excuses," she snapped. "You're disgusting." David stepped closer, but Emily held her ground. "I never thought you'd do something like this. I thought you were different, Dad." Her voice broke on the last word, and the anger that had been simmering inside her for hours started to bubble over. "How could you do this to me? To Mom?" David lowered his head, his shoulders sagging in defeat. "I never meant for you to find out this way. I never meant to hurt you." But Emily was beyond listening. She turned her back on him and walked over to the window, her chest tightening as the weight of the betrayal settled on her. Meanwhile, downstairs, Sarah stood there awkwardly, unsure of what to do. She had always been Emily's best friend, the one person she could trust above all others. But now she was the one who had torn apart their friendship in the most unforgivable way. Sarah's guilt was eating her alive, but she couldn't find the courage to face Emily and explain herself. As Emily stared out the window, her thoughts raced. The image of Sarah and her father replayed over and over in her mind. She could feel the sting of betrayal deep in her chest, each thought a fresh wound. How long had this been going on? Had Sarah known about her father's infidelity the entire time? The questions piled up, but none of the answers. David and Sarah exchanged an uncomfortable glance, both hesitant, both knowing that the silence between them was only making things worse. Finally, David broke the stillness. "Sarah, go home," he said, his voice firm but tired. Sarah hesitated for a moment, her eyes flickering toward the staircase. She could hear Emily's muffled sobs coming from upstairs. Guilt twisted inside her like a knife. She had wanted to confess, to explain why she had done it. But now the words seemed impossible to find. "Personally like this," Sarah said quietly, "I owe her an explanation, David." I didn't answer the question. Sarah didn't think he could pass up a chance to prevent betrayal, so she defended himself with a high glance of hers. The look pierced Sarah's voice. The look pierced Sarah. David's face tightened as he looked at Sarah, his expression a mixture of frustration and regret. "It's too late for explanations, Sarah. I've already hurt her more than enough." Sarah glanced at him, then back up the stairs, as if deciding whether she could bear facing Emily now. She opened her mouth to protest, but David shook his head. "Just go," he said softly, "the decision made. I'll handle this. It's my responsibility to fix it." Reluctantly, Sarah nodded and walked out the front door. David stood still, staring after her, his mind in turmoil. He knew the damage was done, but he couldn't stop himself from thinking that there had to be some way to make things right, some way to repair the gaping hole his actions had created. Upstairs, Emily sat on her bed, the weight of everything crashing down on her. She hadn't been this angry in a long time, and it was a fury that consumed her completely. The trust she had in Sarah, in her father, was gone, replaced by a searing feeling of betrayal. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand and she glanced at it. It was a message from Sarah. "Please let me explain. I never meant to hurt you. Please, just talk to me." Emily stared at the screen, her hand trembling as she gripped the phone. It was impossible for her to imagine how Sarah could even try to explain herself. Everything she thought she knew about her best friend had just fallen apart. How could she even look at Sarah the same way again? In a moment of frustration, Emily threw her phone across the room. The sound of it hitting the wall echoed in the silence, a tangible manifestation of the anger she couldn't control. Downstairs, David paced back and forth, waiting for Emily to come down, to say something, anything. He knew that she was angry, hurt, and confused, but he also knew that the longer he waited, the deeper the rift would grow between them. After what felt like an eternity, Emily finally appeared at the top of the stairs, her eyes red from crying, her expression unreadable. She didn't say anything at first. She simply stared at him as though he were a stranger, someone she no longer recognized. David opened his mouth to speak, but Emily cut him off. "I don't want to hear it," she said sharply. "I don't want to hear any of your excuses. I don't care why you did it. I can't believe you, Dad." David's face fell. He had known this would be hard, but hearing her say those words, seeing the pain in her eyes, made it harder than he could have ever imagined. "Emily, please," he pleaded, stepping toward her. "I made a terrible mistake. I can't change what happened, but I need you to understand that I never wanted to hurt you." "I don't know who you are anymore," Emily whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "You've always been my hero, Dad, the one person I could trust, and now I don't even know who you are." David felt his chest tighten as he reached out to her, but Emily stepped back, her face hardening. "I don't want to talk to you right now." The words hit him like a slap, each syllable a painful reminder of what he had done. "Just leave me alone." David stood there, frozen, unable to find the right words. All he could do was watch as Emily turned and stormed back to her room, slamming the door behind her. The night dragged on in a suffocating silence. David sat in the living room, his thoughts spiraling. He had never imagined that things would come to this. The affair with Sarah had been a mistake, a horrible lapse in judgment. But nothing had prepared him for the fallout, especially with Emily. He had never seen his daughter so broken, so full of pain and betrayal. It was as if he had lost her for good. After a while, David stood up and walked to the foot of Emily's door. He placed his hand on the doorknob but hesitated. He could hear her soft sobs through the door, and the sound tore at his heart. He wanted to comfort her, to tell her that he was sorry, that he would do anything to fix it. But he knew that he had already crossed a line. He didn't know if she would ever be able to forgive him. In the quiet of her room, Emily curled up on her bed, her mind racing. Her thoughts kept returning to Sarah, the girl who had been her closest friend for years. The betrayal stung, but what hurt more was the fact that Sarah had been a part of this lie, this deception. Emily couldn't fathom how Sarah had allowed herself to get so close to her father, knowing what it would do to their friendship. But there was one thing Emily knew for sure. She wasn't ready to forgive anyone. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The next few days felt like a haze to Emily. Each morning she woke up hoping the nightmare would end, that somehow it had all been a bad dream. But it wasn't. It was real, and the pain was all-consuming. She spent her days holed up in her room, avoiding her father, avoiding Sarah's desperate messages. She couldn't bring herself to look at either of them, couldn't face the overwhelming sense of betrayal that kept clawing at her. David tried reaching out, knocking on her door, sending texts, but Emily refused to respond. The anger inside her had taken root, and every attempt to make amends felt like another betrayal. How could he think that a simple apology would fix this? How could he believe that she would just forgive him and pretend everything was fine? One evening, as Emily sat by her window, staring out at the fading sunset, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Sarah again. "I'm pleased. I need to talk to you. I can't stand this silence between us." Emily stared at the message, her finger hovering over the screen. For a moment she debated ignoring it, but something inside her wouldn't let her. She couldn't keep running away from this. With a deep sigh, she typed a response. "Wish should I talk to you? You hurt me, Sarah. You lied to me. You betrayed me in the worst way." She hit send before she could second-guess herself, her emotions flooding back in waves. The message wasn't meant to be kind. It was raw, unfiltered, and laced with hurt. But then, to her surprise, Sarah responded quickly. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I can't stand seeing you like this. I've made so many mistakes, and I wish I could take them all back. Please, just hear me out. One last time." Emily stared at the words, feeling the weight of them settle on her chest. She had never imagined that Sarah would be the one to beg for forgiveness. Emily had always been the one to give in, to make things right, but now Sarah was the one pleading, and it was like the roles had completely reversed. With a shaky breath, Emily typed back, "Fine, but this is the last time. You have 5 minutes." It wasn't much time, but it was all she was willing to give. Within minutes, Sarah was at her door, her eyes red from crying. She looked small and fragile, the girl Emily had once called her best friend, now standing before her like a stranger. Sarah didn't waste time. "I was wrong, Em. I should never have done what I did. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I never meant for it to hurt you." Emily crossed her arms, trying to hold on to the anger that had been her shield. But as Sarah's words sank in, the ice around her heart began to melt, if only a little. She wanted to stay angry, to push Sarah away, but a part of her, deep down, knew that Sarah was genuinely sorry. The silence stretched between them, and for a moment Emily wasn't sure if she could say anything at all. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Sarah. Not right now." And for the first time in days, Emily allowed herself to cry. The room was thick with silence, broken only by the soft sounds of Emily's quiet sobs. Sarah stood there, helpless, her heart aching as she watched the girl she had once shared everything with crumble under the weight of betrayal. She wanted to reach out, to comfort her, but the distance between them felt insurmountable. Emily had every right to be angry. After all, Sarah had been the one to betray her trust, to break their bond in the most unforgivable way. "I'm so sorry, Em," Sarah repeated, her voice breaking. "I never wanted to hurt you. I thought I was in love with him, and I didn't know how to stop it, but I swear it was a mistake." Emily shook her head, her face buried in her hands. "A mistake? How could you think that? How could you—" Her voice cracked and she swallowed hard, trying to suppress the wave of emotions threatening to overwhelm her. "You were my best friend, Sarah. I trusted you more than anyone else. And now I don't even know who you are anymore." The words stung, sharper than anything Sarah had heard before. She had known this was coming, of course, knew that Emily's pain was deep and raw, but hearing it from her mouth was a blow that left her breathless. It wasn't just the affair with David that had destroyed their friendship. It was the feeling that she had abandoned Emily in the worst possible way. "I know," Sarah whispered, her own tears slipping down her face. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I can't lose you, Em, please. I'll do anything. Just tell me what I can do to make this right." Emily looked up, her face red and blotchy from crying. For a long moment they just stared at each other, both of them trying to process the magnitude of what had happened, the destruction that lay between them. It was clear that the damage was irreparable, not in the way Sarah had hoped, not in the way she wanted to fix things, but there was still a small part of Emily that longed for the girl who had once been her closest friend, the one who had been there for her through thick and thin. The thought of losing Sarah completely was unbearable, but she wasn't sure how to move forward, how to navigate the wreckage. "I don't know what to do," Emily admitted quietly, her voice barely audible. "I don't know if I can ever trust you again. And I don't know if I can ever forgive Dad." Sarah stepped forward, but Emily took a step back, holding up a hand to stop her. Don't come any closer," she said, her voice trembling with both anger and pain. "I need space, Sarah. I need time. I don't know what I want from you, but right now I just need you to leave. Please." Sarah's heart shattered all over again as she nodded, stepping back slowly. "Okay, I'll leave. I understand." As Sarah walked toward the door, Emily's voice caught her before she could leave. "Wait," Emily said, her voice thick with emotion. You were supposed to be my best friend, and now I don't even know if I can ever trust anyone again." Sarah stopped, her hand on the doorknob, her back to Emily. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice full of regret. "I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted to lose you." With those words, she left. The door clicked softly behind her, leaving Emily alone with the wreckage of her broken world. The silence that followed felt suffocating, and yet, in a way, it was a relief. She could finally be alone, finally allow herself to feel everything she had been holding in. Downstairs, David sat in the living room, his hands clasped together in his lap. The minutes dragged on, each one feeling like an eternity. He hadn't heard from Emily, and the uncertainty of what was happening upstairs gnawed at him. He wanted to go up there, to speak to her, to try to fix things. But he knew that it was no longer that simple. He had destroyed his relationship with his daughter in ways he could never have imagined, and now he had to live with the consequences. He heard footsteps coming down the stairs, and when Emily appeared in the doorway, her red eyes and tear-streaked face made his heart clench. She didn't say anything at first. She just stood there, looking at him with a mixture of hurt and disbelief. David stood up slowly, his heart sinking further into his chest. "Emily, I know I've failed you. I know I've hurt you, and I can't fix that. But I need you to understand. What I did because I was selfish. I thought I could get away with it. I thought I could keep it hidden and that it wouldn't matter. But it does matter, and I was wrong." Emily shook her head, her fists clenched at her sides. "No, Dad, you don't get it. You don't understand how badly you've broken me. How could you do this to me, to Mom?" Her voice cracked again, and she took a step back, her entire body trembling with the weight of everything she was feeling. "I never meant to hurt you," David said again, his voice breaking. "I love you, Emily. I swear I never wanted to lose you. But I've already lost you, haven't I?" The words hung in the air between them, unspoken yet painfully clear. Emily looked at her father, her heart torn between the man she had once admired and the man who had shattered her trust. She didn't know if she could ever forgive him. But as she stood there staring at him, one thing became painfully obvious. Everything had changed. Days turned into weeks, and the fractures in Emily's world remained. Sarah's attempts to rebuild their friendship were met with silence, and David's efforts to repair his relationship with his daughter seemed in vain. Emily, lost in her own grief, couldn't find it within herself to forgive them. Not yet. The pain was too raw, too deep. Life moved forward, but it was never the same. Trust, once broken, couldn't be easily restored. Emily learned that some wounds took longer to heal than others, and in the end, the only person she could truly rely on was herself.